The Pope himself annulled Eleanor of Aquitaine's marriage to the King of France after 15 years together, and the official reason doesn't hold up under scrutiny. For centuries, we've been told a simple story. Eleanor and Louis VII were related too closely. Consanguinity, a bloodline problem. The church said so, and that was that. I've read the genealogies myself, traced the family trees back through the chronicles. The relationship was distant enough that popes had granted exemptions for far closer matches before, and would again. But let's start with what everyone accepts. 1137. Eleanor, 15 years old, marries Louis, the heir to France. She brings with her the Duchy of Aquitaine, a territory larger and richer than the lands Louis's father actually controls. It's the marriage of the century. Within months, Louis becomes king. Eleanor becomes queen of the most powerful realm in Christendom. They have 2 daughters, no sons. That's the problem, not bloodlines but heirs. 15 years pass. Eleanor watches Louis grow more pious, more distant. The Crusades call to him. He drags her to the Holy Land in 1147, where she nearly dies of fever. When they return, the marriage is already rotting. In 1152, the Pope grants the annulment. Consanguinity, the documents say. But here's where I started digging. The same genealogical distance had never stopped anyone before. Not in French royal circles, not anywhere. The excuse was invented retroactively. I've seen it in other cases, when the real reason is too dangerous to write down. So what was the actual reason? Here's where the story splinters. Some whispered that Eleanor had been unfaithful, that she'd taken a lover in Antioch during the Crusade. A Syrian nobleman, some said. Others. The rumors were toxic enough that Louis couldn't ignore them, but not proven enough to announce publicly. But there's another possibility that historians have largely overlooked. What if the scandal wasn't about adultery at all? What if Eleanor had become pregnant by Louis, miscarried or stillborn, and the trauma, or something worse, had made her unable to bear sons? A barren queen wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a political catastrophe. The church couldn't say that aloud. A king divorcing his wife because she couldn't produce a male heir. That was naked power politics, and it violated the sacred bond of marriage. Much safer to invoke consanguinity, a technical, impersonal reason. Bloodlines, not bodies. Law, not lust. Here's what happened next, and this is where it gets interesting. 8 weeks after the annulment, Eleanor married Henry of Anjou. Henry was 15 years younger than her, less powerful than Louis, and he was directly challenging Louis's authority in Aquitaine. Everyone whispered that she was marrying for love or revenge or both. But I think the timing tells a different story. Eleanor married Henry because he could give her what Louis couldn't or wouldn't: ambition, territory, and within 4 years Henry became King of England. Eleanor had just married the future ruler of an empire. That's not an accident of passion, that's strategy. The real scandal, then, wasn't infidelity or bloodlines. It was that Eleanor had outmaneuvered the King of France. She'd orchestrated her own freedom using the church as cover, and then she'd married a man who would make her more powerful than she'd ever been as Louis's queen. The annulment wasn't about hiding shame. It was about hiding brilliance. And the church, they needed the story to be about consanguinity because Eleanor's real crime was worse than adultery. She'd exposed the machinery. She'd shown that an annulment could be weaponized, that bloodlines could be invented, that a woman could use the system against itself. That was heresy of a different kind. Louis never remarried for love. He eventually took another wife, Constance of Castile, for duty. They had a son, finally, an heir. But by then, Eleanor was already building dynasties across the channel. She'd given Henry 8 children, several of whom would become kings and queens in their own right. The consanguinity excuse held up because it was boring enough to be believed. Nobody wanted to examine it too closely. The church had its cover story. Louis had his dignity, sort of. And Eleanor disappeared into legend as the woman who married 2 kings and outlived most of them. What strikes me, looking back at the records, is how perfectly the lie worked. For 800 years, historians accepted the bloodline explanation because it was written in Latin and sealed by the Pope. We didn't ask harder questions. We didn't trace the genealogies closely enough. We didn't consider that sometimes the official reason is the one designed to stop you from looking further. Eleanor lived to be 82, ancient for her time. She outlived Louis by decades. She saw her sons tear each other apart fighting for his throne. She saw her legacy split across kingdoms, and she never once, as far as the records show, explained why she really left him. The scandal was never written down because Eleanor refused to write it. The church buried it under Latin legal language, and we've been reading the same bloodline excuse for nearly a millennium, never quite noticing that it doesn't fit. Sometimes the deepest secrets are hidden in plain sight, in the official documents, in the explanations that are just a little too neat. The truth about Eleanor's annulment may never be fully known, but what we do know is this: a 15-year marriage doesn't dissolve over bloodlines that everyone conveniently ignored before and after. Something happened in those years that made the King of France willing to let go of the largest territory in his realm. And something in Eleanor made her strategic enough to exploit that moment into a crown twice as powerful. Subscribe for more untold stories from the courts where power, scandal, and secrets shaped history.